Chapter 8. It wasn't trust that motivated me to follow Lone Wolf that day. It was fear. As he waved for me to follow, I was too frightened after the incident to stay there alone. We traveled together to the northwest for nearly a week. It wasn't nearly the same as traveling alone. He knew the forest. It was his. He was aware of danger well before it appeared. This was a trick that took many months for me to learn. We ate well. He taught me new plants that could be eaten. He constructed traps, and one night, in a very short amount of time, he crafted a bow and arrow. He showed me how animals could be tracked using the signs the forest provided. He was a patient teacher, even though we had no common language at first. He simply showed what he wanted me to know as he said the Indian names for items and actions. Some of the Indian words that were repeated often were easy to learn. After hearing the English version of the same words, Lone Wolf quickly began to build his English vocabulary. He always laughed and smiled when we learned new words together. He learned my name, although it came out more like Silas, with a pause between syllables. The fourth day we came to a fast-moving stream. Lone Wolf searched the area along the stream for a short period before he discovered what appeared to be an overgrown trail. Excitedly, he bounded along the path and up a steep embankment, searching for something. At the top, he stopped suddenly and turned around toward me, wearing a large grin on his angular face. He waved for me to join him. Upon reaching the top, a quick glance to the left revealed the source of his excitement. Hidden in a thicket of bushes and small trees was a splendid wooden canoe. The canoe had been carved from the trunk of a tree. The craftsmanship was remarkable. We spent the next 2 days paddling and at times dragging that canoe between streams. We were able to move at an incredibly rapid pace, although learning to paddle well enough to keep up with Lone Wolf was a challenge at first. We came upon an amazingly wide river. It was the largest river I had ever seen. We paddled across this river and the current was very strong. On the other side, we again picked up a network of streams. After days of navigating streams, we hid the canoe a short distance off a more worn path and finished our journey on foot. Traveling and learning with Lone Wolf brought the first feelings of happiness to me since before the sickness had descended upon my old village. The sickness that had brought on a series of events and betrayals that forced me to question every relationship I had cared about. The day we arrived at Lone Wolf's village was terrifying. I smelled the smoke from the village before seeing it or hearing it. I began walking slowly, falling far back of Lone Wolf. He tried to offer assurance it was safe, but the stories from my past had created fears and biases that could not be ignored. After some hesitation, the courage to go forward was inspired by trust, developed in my new friend. Everything I had learned and been told about these people turned out to be wrong. The sounds of settlement filled the air as we slipped through the trees into a massive clearing. We walked across an open area as rows of large wooden structures came into view. There were 15 buildings constructed of wooden poles, logs, and bark. Each building had smoke rising through openings in the roof. To the left was a river. The village was built on a bend in the river. The opening to the river was about 30 yards wide, and the forest on either side of the opening was very thick as the river curved sharply away from the settlement on both sides. There were hundreds and hundreds of men, women, and children performing various tasks in the clearing. I learned later over 900 people lived in the village. Young children ran everywhere laughing and playing. Some were watching adults performing tasks. A group of older men had assembled in the clearing prior to our coming, as if they had been expecting us. A few of them seemed happy to see us, or at least Lone Wolf, while others had hardened or even angry looks on their faces. Lone Wolf was greeted with pats on the shoulder as he began to speak to the group of men. He spoke rapidly and eventually made some of the same signs he had made when he told me the story in the woods. The group of men followed every word and looked more and more impressed as the story went on. Some glanced at me occasionally, and a few even gave what seemed to be nods of approval. When Lone Wolf finished, some of the men approached and patted me on the shoulder as the rest began to disperse. 2 of the men from the circle led us toward one of the wooden longhouses. Most of the people we encountered looked on curiously. Small children came forward to touch my skin and clothing. Some of the younger men were clearly agitated at my presence. We entered the building and walked to an area where several women and children of various ages were awaiting our arrival. The longhouse was smoky and smelly inside. It was clear from the compartments built off a center aisle that many families lived in each longhouse. Lone Wolf repeated the whole story he had told moments before. After he finished the story, he continued to speak and gesture toward me. He placed his hand on my shoulder and spun me around. He gently lifted the shirt to reveal the healing welts on my back, welts I previously didn't know he was even aware of. One of the women had tears in her eyes as she smiled at me. From that moment on, Lone Wolf's parents, aunts, uncles, older brother, and 2 younger sisters treated me like part of their family. I was shown a place to sleep and store personals among them. Over the next few months, I learned from this new family and other members of the community. I was taught to hunt, using a bow and arrow and harpoon, build shelters, make canoes and tools, and communicate using a dialect of the Iroquoian language. These people were efficient and hard-working, but still found time to enjoy life every day. They were the happiest people I had ever known. They were loving people, quick to praise and build children up, and rarely critical of actions. The pace of their life was relaxing, and not once was my new family too busy to show me how to do something or lend a hand. It was easy to become a part of this world, and I awoke each day eager to learn, to grow, to live. There was a small group within the village that avoided contact with me. The suspicious and hostile looks made me uncomfortable. As time passed without incident, it became easy to accept that some tribe members had reservations about my presence. Despite the insecurity brought on by the rejection of a few, growing knowledge and numerous new skills caused me to slowly begin feeling like a man rather than a boy in my time with the Wyandotte. In the early fall, shortly after harvesting had begun, tragedy struck for the first time since I had joined them. Talaf Harjo, Crazy Bear, the chief of the tribe, had authorized the beginning of trade expeditions to begin securing winter supplies from Wyandotte trade partners. Some of these groups traveled as far as Quebec City or Montreal to trade with the French. Others were sent to carry goods to other tribes like the Erie, Algonquin, Chippewa, or Ottawa. Goods mainly maize, beans, squash, tobacco, dried fish, and beaver pelts, many acquired through trade with French fur trappers who frequently stopped at the settlement, were loaded into canoes to be carried to the various destinations. The mood of the camp changed quickly on that cloudy fall morning. Everyone seemed to have a new destination and a task to perform. Some men had begun gathering thick tree branches, vines, and long grasses and piling them near a group of women. The women were using these to construct what looked like to be portable beds. It was amazing to watch the efficiency with which they worked. Women were mixing together animal fat and various oils to create black, red, green, and violet paint, which some of the men had begun to apply to their faces and bare upper bodies. Although I had begun to wear deerskin clothing like the other men, I preferred to wear a tunic that covered my upper body, that most men wore only in the winter. Morning mist was still coming off the river in a few spots as 4 canoes suddenly came into sight. Men dropped what they were doing and scrambled toward the river shore. I scanned the crowd for Lone Wolf but couldn't see him with all the commotion. Each of the canoes moved slowly and rode very low in the water under extreme weight. Large sacks were stacked not in but across the middle in front of each canoe. As the canoes came closer to shore, the items that appeared to be sacks could now be seen more clearly. They were bodies. Each canoe was weighted down with lifeless, pale, desecrated bodies. I moved closer, unsure of what to do, as a large hand grasped my upper arm. Uncas, the fox, Lone Wolf's father, told me to follow him. At the riverbank, we picked up one of the mutilated bodies and carried it to one of the portable beds I had seen the women building earlier. Some of the dead had been shot by guns. Many of the heads had been bashed in, and other bodies had arrows protruding from them. It was a grisly scene. Of the 3 trade groups that had been sent out, 2 had been completely wiped out. Only one group had successfully reached their destination. They had recovered the bodies of the other 2 groups when they failed to meet a rendezvous point that had been predetermined. Some of the Iroquois were declaring war on the Wyandot and other tribes in the area over control of fur trading routes. The same conflict had caused me to meet Lone Wolf that day in the woods months earlier. The whole village mourned and feasted over the next 3 days. The surviving family members of each of the dead men gathered his possessions and carefully organized them on the portable platform with the bodies so the departed would have them during their trip to the spirit world. Their bodies were then carried approximately 1 mile to another clearing with close to 100 small house-like structures in it. Around each body, men constructed one of these small houses just large enough to encase the portable platform the body was on. By the end of the 3rd day, this ritual had been performed for all bodies. I was not there to see the whole process. When we approached the burial ground the first day, an argument broke out between Lone Wolf and a couple of men who never spoke to me. One of the young men's fathers had died on the trade expedition. He didn't want me there. He claimed that the spirits might be insulted if a non-believer was at the burials. Some of the older men mediated the argument. Lone Wolf asked me to leave with apologies. For each of the next 3 days, I stayed in the village while groups went to speak their piece with the departed. The 4th day, after the trade party came back, the whole village returned to normal activity as if nothing had ever happened. They weren't the only trade parties slaughtered that fall. The Wyandot were tough, resilient, loyal people, and I admired them for these qualities.